And everybody, episode 713 of the podcast, Disturbing America, the Torres Sports Podcast, presented by Betfred Sportsbook. It is Friday, May 26th, 2023. People, I hope everybody's doing well. I hope everybody is having a great day, and I hope everybody is ready for the FFE, the Fun Friday edition of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, last one before the holiday. Here is what you need to know about today's show. We're going to actually open with two separate college football stories. How about that? We'll start the Georgia Bulldogs, two-time reigning national champ, best program in the country, but they are dealing with quite a bit of off-the-field news as another player was arrested this week. We are going to talk about that and what it means for a program that might be dealing with a little bit of a culture crisis on their hands. We'll talk about all of it, the context, what you need to know. From there, Deion Sanders. He is in the news again. He said something very, very interesting about NIL and about the kind of modern player. It's a fascinating conversation. We're going to dive into his comments. Then from there, we will wrap Aaron Right, Aaron Wrong, my best and worst takes of the week. Busy show, fun show. Should mention, if you're itching for basketball, let's just do a couple housekeeping notes before we get into the show. If you're itching for basketball, I'll be updating the YouTube page throughout the weekend. If anything relevant happens, have a little segment on Caleb Love up there. Obviously, any other news or notes that are relevant will be discussed on the YouTube page. Also, speaking of the weekend, no new shows until Tuesday. Obviously, again, I know many of you are traveling, spending time with family. I'll be back on Tuesday with a loaded show, but as of right now, no show on Monday because of the holiday. And then finally, for those of you who are into the NBA draft, remember, on the College Hoops Daily podcast feed, Zach Kroll works for me, Aaron Torres Media. We are doing and ramping up our NBA draft coverage on the College Hoops Daily podcast feed. Talked Victor Wembanyama, talked about who should go number 2. So make sure you're subscribed and following the College Hoops Daily feed wherever you get podcasts. Search College Hoops Daily, and you'll hear me and Zach breaking down Wembanyama, Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson. Next week, Anthony Black, Cason Wallace, on and on. A lot going on in the world of Torres Media, even though there's not a ton going on in the world of sports. With that said, though, let's not waste any more time and let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, I will tell you, we have not led the show or talked in general college football in quite some time. And it is because it isn't an exaggeration to say these are the slowest couple weeks, maybe on the entire college football calendar. Most schools, players aren't even on campus. Finals are done. Guys are home for 2 or 3 weeks during the end of May. Many schools will have players report back this weekend. And so outside of the schools that are still kind of mining the portal for a player or two, or like 30 if you're Deion Sanders, outside of them, there's not really much going on. I actually saw Nick Saban was in Europe on vacation. That tells you how slow things are. But there is one place where there is still a lot of news, and most of it is not good. And that's the place where it should be all good news, all rainbows and sunshines. That is Athens, Georgia, where yet another Georgia football player was arrested earlier this week. Here's what you need to know about the latest arrest, and here is why it's important. The latest arrest for Georgia football, and we don't talk about every arrest that's ever happened in college football, but this one does feel significant, and let me explain why. It came on Tuesday afternoon. We found out about it on Tuesday night when a wide receiver, Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint, was arrested for driving 90 in a 45 zone, charged with reckless driving and speeding the maximum limits. So he is arrested and charged. And it's just so dumb, swerving in and out of traffic, 90 miles an hour in the middle of the day, in the middle of a crowded area. He gets arrested, and he is now in trouble at Georgia. The question becomes, many of you are probably thinking, Torres, why do you care? It's a young guy. He was speeding. He was driving too fast. It happens in every city, in every college town in America. When you were his age, you probably drove too fast sometimes. Heck, you probably drive too fast now. To which I would say, one thing about me, I always try to keep it real. I'm not perfect. I don't think I've ever gotten a speeding ticket that I can remember, but I certainly have driven over the speed limit, and I've certainly never been a perfect driver by any stretch of the imagination. And so if it was just about a random player on a random football team getting arrested for speeding and reckless driving, this wouldn't be a story that I talked about or that any other college football or sports podcast or radio show talked about at all. The problem is, this isn't the first driving-related arrest or driving-related incident over the last couple months at Georgia. As a matter of fact, it's not the second or third as well. For those of you who have not been following, this is now an epidemic, if you will, at the University of Georgia, as best I can count. This is the fourth different reckless driving incident involving Georgia football players, including some of their most high-profile players. For people who do not remember, probably the most notable one came on the day of the Georgia National Championship Parade in Athens. And I hate to bring it up. We've talked about it before. It's a tragic incident, but it was an incident involving a Georgia staffer named Chandler LaCroix. She was driving 4 people. She got in a crash that ultimately took her own life, as well as Devin Willock, who was a player on the Georgia football team. Awful story, tragic story. And unfortunately, as we found out later, and I'm not here to point fingers after the fact, but it was a largely avoidable story. Chandler LaCroix was driving 104 miles an hour. And as we later found out, there was alcohol in her system, according to the toxicology report. Doesn't make her a bad person, doesn't make her a bad human. This isn't to tear down young people and all that stuff. This was a tragic incident where 2 people lost their lives. The problem is, as that story unfolded, we started to learn more stories about stuff going on with Georgia. One, keep this in mind. We found out later that Jalen Carter, who was projected as potentially the number 1 pick in the draft, but certainly a top 3, top 4 pick in the draft, was actually racing against Chandler LaCroix that night in Athens. He left the scene of the incident after the crime. He ended up coming back. Now, to his, I don't know if credit's the right word, but alcohol was not involved in his case. But he eventually got arrested for this. And remember, he was at the NFL Combine and had to leave the NFL Combine in Indianapolis to return to Athens to turn himself into police. On top of that, we found out after the fact that Jamon Dumas Johnson, another team captain, was actually arrested there was an incident a few days before that incident where he was ultimately arrested. And then most recently, prior to the incident that I'm talking about on Tuesday, there was also a DUI and reckless driving incident involving a wide receiver named Denylon Morissette. And I should mention, by the way, there was another player, Ra Thomas, a transfer from Mississippi State, who was arrested. That had nothing to do with driving or speeding. You can look that one up itself. But even if you just look at the speeding, the driving, the reckless driving incidents involving Georgia football players, that is now, this incident that just happened on Tuesday, it is now the 4th incident since mid-January involving Georgia football players. It is the 2nd incident involving a team captain. 2 of the 4 have involved alcohol. And of course, one of them was a fatal crash that took 2 people's lives. So forgive me for those of you that, Torres, he's just trying to make big something out of nothing over this Georgia incident because it's Georgia and it's the number 1 team in the country. No. The reason I'm talking about this is because it is the 4th driving incident. Again, 2nd involving alcohol, 2nd involving a team captain. Unfortunately, one of them was fatal. And so forgive me for talking about this, but I believe that there is an issue within the Georgia football program. And by the way, you know who else happens to agree with me? If you think that I'm overreacting, earlier this week, the Georgia school president came out with a statement basically condemning things, and the Georgia AD came out with a statement. Now, to this point, Kirby Smart has not commented on the last 2, but if you don't think there is a problem at Georgia, a problem that needs to be solved, a problem that is putting the citizens of that town and surrounding area at risk, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Now, to Kirby Smart's credit, I don't want to totally blame everything on him. These are adults. These are young men. We're going to talk about it in a minute with Deion Sanders talking about the responsibility that comes with being a young man on a college campus. So this isn't all on Kirby Smart. And to his credit, he has brought in people to try and explain the severity of what is going on. It's worth noting that at a press conference on March 14th, he was asked about this. Obviously, those were his first, I believe, public comments following the tragic incident involving the two people that died. And here is what Kirby Smart said about it. He said, "We brought in Athens Clarke County Police and UGA Police to address a lot of these issues with our team in a team meeting setting, and played some video of things that were going on in Atlanta, drag racing and things like that." And so I bring it up because Kirby Smart is clearly aware, Kirby Smart is very concerned, and Kirby Smart has brought in law enforcement to explain the severity of this incident, of all these incidents. So this isn't all on Kirby Smart. It's not to say he should be fired or he needs to be this or he needs to be that. That's not what I'm saying at all. But at the same time, the same thing keeps happening over and over and over again. What do we always say? The definition of insanity is the same thing happening over and over and expecting different results. And so to me, not enough is being done. And to me, a lot of this does fall on Kirby Smart. It sucks. You're a head football coach. You want to focus on football. But when you get paid $11 million a year, which is what Kirby Smart's salary is, fair or not, when stuff starts happening, not once, not twice, but 4 times in a short amount of time, you're going to be called to the mat and you are going to be held responsible. And it's not totally fair. And I understand he's a football coach, but you're responsible for the players you bring to campus. You're responsible for their actions when they are breaking the law. In a lot of ways, you know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of the incident at Alabama, the second gun incident a few weeks ago. And we talked about it then. We all know the alleged incident that involved Brandon Miller a few months back at Alabama. And we talked about that extensively. And we talked about what should happen. And we talked about who should be blamed. But then a few weeks ago, as you remember, an Alabama recruit, a commit out of the portal named Jaquan Walton, was arrested with a gun on campus. Nate Oates wasn't there. The kid had never played. And to Nate Oates' credit, he said he immediately released a statement that said, this kid is not part of our program and we are not actively recruiting him. At the same time, though, what did I also say? I said Nate Oates has to be tougher. Nate Oates has to come down on his guys. When those guys return to campus this spring, he has to say there is a zero tolerance policy for guns in his program. And when it comes to Georgia, I don't know what the answer is, but Kirby Smart has to do more. Now, I can't say there should be a zero tolerance policy for speeding because a guy might get arrested for doing, 68 in a 65. But at the same time, something more has to be done. You go back to the punishment for all of these incidences. Jamin Dumas Johnson was handled internally. And to this point, Kirby Smart has not released any type of statement on Denylon Morissette's incident and what his punishment is, and obviously nothing on the most recent incident as well. And so to me, I don't know what the answer is, but whatever you're doing is not working. I don't know if it's a 1-game suspension, a 3-game suspension, a 6-game suspension. Maybe it's a case-by-case basis. I understand you can't compare a slight speeding situation to stuff that involves alcohol, this, that, the other thing. But again, when it's not 1, it's not 2, it's not 3, it's 4 different incidents in a 5-month span, and it involves some of your most high-profile players, something has to change. Clearly bringing in speakers and people from the community isn't enough. Clearly you trying to put your foot down and handle things internally isn't enough. And I'll tell you what, if I was Kirby Smart, when my players report back to campus this summer, this is the number 1 conversation. Not sure how much you can even spend time with them this time of year, but hey, we have no tolerance for this. If this happens, you're either off the team, you're not playing week 1, you might not be playing week 2 because something has to change. All right, so what I want to do, I want to take a quick break. And when I come back, we're going to talk more college football. You know why? Because Coach Prime is back in the news. He's talking about NIL. He's talking about the new era of college sports. Some of you kids, you need to toughen up, Buttercup. That's next. All right, we're getting back to the show in a minute. But before we do, I want to welcome back our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. The NBA playoffs are here, and nobody has you covered quite like Betfred. By now, you know Betfred's story. Started in 1967 in the UK. Over 1,200 shops in the UK. they have since come to the United States and made a major splash. They are not only the presenting sponsor of the Aaron Torres podcast and all things Aaron Torres media, but also the Cincinnati Bengals, the Colorado Rockies, the Denver Broncos. And what I love about Betfred Sportsbook is that nobody takes care of their customers quite like Betfred. You've seen the Betfred Sportsbook suite at Bengals games. It is hopping. We have sent listeners of this show to Denver Broncos VIP tailgates. Betfred bettors have thrown out first pitches at Colorado Rockies games. Again, nobody takes care of you like Betfred Sportsbook does, and here is what they are doing for the NBA playoffs. How about this for a deal? Bet $50 on any game, all playoffs long, get up to $1,111 in free bets. Here's how it works. Download the Betfred Sportsbook app, bet $50 on any game. You automatically get $111 in free bets. But beyond that, here is what else Betfred does for you. They're going to give you up to $200 in insurance for the first 5 weeks that you're a Betfred customer. So maybe you make a bad pick. We all do. We've all been there. Trust me. You followed my picks in March Madness. It happens. So you bet 200, doesn't work out. Get 200 insurance for the first 5 weeks that you are a Betfred customer, equating up to $1,111 in free bets thanks to Betfred. Again, nobody takes care of you like Betfred does. Love working with them. They are the presenting sponsor of the Aaron Torres pod. Tell them Torres sent you. Download the Betfred Sportsbook app right now. All right, everybody. I'm back. Gonna be back. Do want to switch gears, and I want to stick with the football conversation, but I want to go in a different direction. And I want to go to a guy in a program that we have talked about a ton over the last 6 months or so. That is Coach Prime, Deion Sanders in Colorado. And so obviously, if you listen to this show, if you follow on YouTube, you know I've talked about Coach Prime a ton. The recruiting, the roster flip, the this, the that. Every single day, it feels as though Coach Prime is doing something to put his team and his program in the news. But ultimately, as time has gone on, this is what I've realized about Coach Prime. Now, we're going to find out in time if he wins or not. Now, I believe he's going to win, and I think he's going to win relative to Colorado at a very high level. What is success at Colorado? I don't know, but I ultimately believe he is going to have a ton of success there doing it his way. But win or lose, that stuff that'll get sorted out in the coming weeks, months, and years. But what I respect about him in the moment is that he is genuinely 100% authentic in all moments. He is genuinely 100% true to himself. And more than anything, Coach Prime is not afraid to say something that is unpopular, even if he knows he's going to get backlash. And that's something, I think everybody in sports, I say what's on my mind and I this and I that. Bottom line is that's not really the case at all. That's especially not the case in college football, where every single coach except Coach Prime is seemingly very image conscious, worried about what their words, his or her words will say, what it'll impact, how it'll impact recruiting, what'll it mean? I don't want to make headlines. I'm just a football coach. I want to stay quiet in the background. Coach Prime is the exact opposite, though, and he always says what's on his mind, and he always says what he believes, again, even if it is going to be unpopular, because ultimately what I believe his message is like, I'm going to say this for the good of my program, but for the good of college football as well. And so I bring it up because over the last few days, there were some very, very, very interesting quotes attributed to Coach Prime involving the conversation about NIL. It is a conversation that everybody's having. Is it good? Is it bad? Collectives, pay for play, whatever. So Coach Prime apparently was asked about it in some sort of Q&A. And I saw this video via Colorado's in-house video production team, Well Off Media, run by Coach Prime's son, Deion Sanders Jr., but he was asked about NIL. And I hope you're sitting down because this quote about NIL is absolutely incredible. Here is what Coach Prime had to say. It's a long quote. Bear with me. This is what he said. He said, "You can't want a bag of money. You want to be paid like a professional, but you want to be treated like a child. That don't work. If you want to be compensated like a pro, the media now going to treat you like a pro. You got kids working their butts off at these local restaurants, these local businesses, right? Just to make it through college. Then you got a kid coming in here with a luxury car that really ain't done nothing. Then he messes around and drops a ball that is decisive in a game, and you think they're going to feel sorry for you? That don't work like that. If you're going to be motivated by claps, you have to be motivated by boos too. That is from Coach Prime Deion Sanders from Colorado. And let me just say this. You know that gif on social media of I think it's Glenn Close standing up at one of these award shows and clapping, giving a standing ovation? That is exactly how I feel about Coach Prime after this quote. Because ultimately, he hits on so many different things that I have talked about on this show for years. And if you go back, you can go back in the archives and you can find back in 2019, 2020, as all these big changes that are now in college sports were coming up, I told you all the stuff that was going to happen, all the stuff that's happening now was going to end up happening. When everybody wanted the one-time transfer, everybody should be able to transfer whenever they want. I said, okay, but you understand that you're going to have players transferring after a week on campus, a month on campus. You're going to have kids going to 3, 4, 5 colleges in a 5-year span. You're going to have guys leaving campus without a degree because they transferred so many times their credits don't transfer over. Just understand, you want people to be able to transfer whenever they want. Well, these are the consequences that come with it. It was the same with NIL. I don't think you can ever find me say on this show that I was anti-NIL, but I did have questions. And the number one question is this going to be regulated? And then when it was, then if I said, is it going to be oh, you can't regulate, players should be allowed to make whatever. And I said, okay, I get it. I understand. Just don't be mad when it becomes a total pay-for-play thing, when there's tampering, when people are buying other players off your roster. You could go back and listen. I talked about all this stuff 2, 3, 4 years ago. And so I bring it up because over time, if you're a listener of this show, you know my stance on stuff. I get frustrated. I get mad. I tell you my opinion, but eventually I move on. Because at the end of the day, nobody at the NCAA is sitting there saying, I wonder what Aaron Torres thinks about the one-time transfer rule. I wonder what Aaron Torres thinks about NIL. And so I eventually move on and I eventually just stop talking about this stuff because there's nothing I can do to change it. But I do think we are now starting to realize the consequences of 2 massive rule changes in a very short span and what it means for college sports. Listen, I'm not in favor of the one-time transfer in the way that it currently is. But this is what everybody wanted. This is what everybody demanded. So now you can't be mad when schools are tampering with your players. Now you can't be mad when a coach from another school is trying to convince your player to enter the portal. This is what everybody wanted. This is what everybody demanded. You also can't be mad when you have a kid committed in, September if you're a football program, and then the day before signing day, somebody comes in with a bag and is able to get him to decommit. This is what everybody wanted. This is what everybody said that we needed to have in college sports. And these are the consequences. We wanted to push through all these rules without ever thinking about the consequences. And so to bring it back to Coach Prime, to bring it back to the comments that he made earlier this week, and I'm not going to read the whole thing again, but here's what he said. You can't want a bag of money. You want to be paid like a professional, but you want to be treated like a child. And so that is my number one thing, is that everybody wanted all these rule changes. Everybody wanted everything in favor of the player. And I sat there and said, you know what? If you want NIL, that's fine. If you want the transfer portal, that's fine. But it has to be a two-way street. You can't give 100% of the power to the player because ultimately then you have chaos, which we're largely seeing right now. And so I bring it up because I love Coach Prime. I love what he said. And I believe, again, I can't promise you that he's going to do X, Y, or Z at Colorado, but I believe that he is the face of the new era of college sports as we know it. Essentially, what Coach Prime says with his actions and what Coach Prime says with his words is this. Okay, you guys and girls want to be treated like professionals? That's fine. We're going to pay you. You're going to be allowed to leave if you want, but at the same time, I'm going to treat you like a professional, like when I was in the NFL, which means that if you're not living up to expectations, you got to get the heck out of here, and I'm going to find somebody who will replace you who can. And so I give Coach Prime credit, again, not only for these comments, but for putting his proverbial money where his mouth is with everything that he's done since he's gotten to Colorado. And again, to be blunt, I have no problem with anything Coach Prime has done because, again, This is what everybody wanted. This is what everybody pushed for without thinking about the alternative. So when Coach Prime came in and in his first meeting he said, I'm bringing my own luggage, and it's Louis, and some of y'all got to enter the transfer portal because you're not good enough to play here. I did the little Glenn Close clap because I said, thank you. Listen, it can't be a two-way street. You can't just stay on scholarship, get NIL money, get everything that comes with being a college athlete and not perform. Had no problem with it. I had no problem with Coach Prime shaking up his roster after spring practice. Now, I think it's a little crazy, 60-plus players at the portal. What are we down to? About 8-9 guys that were in the program last year? But again, everyone else wanted to professionalize college sports. I warned you about what could happen. Well, professionalization is here, and Coach Prime is taking it to another level, and I have no problem with these comments at all because he's saying what we're all thinking is okay, cool. You get the good stuff, but there has to be bad stuff as well. There has to be consequences as well. You want to be able to leave whenever you want. Well, I'm going to kick you out if you don't live up to it. You want to be paid like a professional. Okay, that's fine. But now that you're getting a cut of the pie, which you deserve, by the way, you now got to deliver and you got to meet expectations. And so I love this from Coach Prime. I love the quote. I love the comment. You want to be paid like a professional, but you want to be treated like a child. I love everything about it. And I give Coach Prime so much credit for keeping it real, for being honest. And as I said, I think he is the face of this new era of college football. Be back in a minute. Do want to switch gears, and I want to talk about a topic and really circle back on a topic that we discussed about a week ago, and that is the status of Caleb Love, the former North Carolina guard. By now, you know the story. Don't need me to tell you and rehash the whole situation, but was at North Carolina for 3 years, certainly had some great moments, most notably leading North Carolina to the 2022 national championship game. But this year was an unmitigated disaster, decides to enter the portal. And probably about a month and a half ago, I want to say it was early to mid-April, announces, okay, I know where I'm going. I'm going to the University of Michigan. I'm going to be the guy for Juwan Howard, and I am going to be the guy to get things back on track for the Wolverines. Just one problem. About a week ago, we found out that there was an issue with the Michigan admissions department, that Caleb Love would not be enrolling at Michigan. It left Michigan scrambling for sure, but it also left Caleb Love back on the open market trying to find yet another transfer home. And so since that piece of news came out, it has been pretty quiet. But on Wednesday, we did get a little piece of information, a good, solid, interesting report out of Eric Bossy of 24/7 Sports, recruiting writer, really plugged in guy, who said that 3 schools have emerged for Caleb Love. Those 3 schools, the Texas Longhorns, the Gonzaga Bulldogs, and the Arizona Wildcats. So what I want to do now is spend a few minutes talking about each school, Caleb Love, do they make sense, and see if we can find a landing spot for Caleb Love for the second time this offseason. Before we even get into the schools, though, I should mention, and I want to be respectful of what Eric Bossy wrote, because there are a couple little caveats with what he wrote. While there are certainly whispers about what's going on with Caleb Love right now, it's hard to get concrete information on this for 2 specific reasons. Eric Bossy brings it up, so it's important to note that here. One, the recruitment is very quiet, and I get why if you're Caleb Love's camp, right? You had the high school recruitment, you get to do the cool graphics and the top 5s and the this and the that. Then you also had the portal recruitment where you put out the graphic, I'm going to Michigan, I'm coming home, whatever. And so obviously after the Michigan thing doesn't work, you're not going to go through the whole thing. You're not going to release a group of schools. You're not going to do a top 5 or a top 3. You just want to find a landing spot at this point. It's late May. It's the last week of May. You got to get ready for summer school and find a spot to call home. On top of that, and this is another important point, is that right now it is technically a recruiting dead period. So there's really no communication between Caleb Love or any transfer and the schools that are recruiting them. And so again, we have to take all of this with a grain of salt. And one thing I can tell you about portal recruiting, it changes very quickly. The school that might be hot today might be not hot tomorrow. The school that wasn't in the mix today may get the commitment tomorrow. So a lot can change, but let's get into the 3 schools that are referenced in the article that I just mentioned. I want to start In an interesting spot, I actually want to start with the Arizona Wildcats because Arizona's interesting. It's worth noting they have real ties to Caleb Love. Steve Robinson, an assistant coach at Arizona, was an assistant coach at North Carolina during Caleb Love's freshman year. So it's worth noting, like there are real ties to Caleb Love in this recruitment. At the same time, though, when I'm looking at how Caleb Love could potentially fit with the Arizona Wildcats, I'll be blunt. I just don't see it. And to use a terrible pun, I don't love it at all. So for people who don't know Arizona's kind of depth chart right now, let me just kind of lay it out really quick. And we did this a little bit on Monday's Aaron Torres pod, because if you remember, that was the day that it was the episode after Keyshawn Johnson had committed the San Diego State transfer. And so they have Keyshawn Johnson. They have a couple other front court guys. And in the backcourt right now, here's what Arizona has. Kylan Boswell, former 5-star recruit, played last year as a true freshman, enrolled a year early. He's going to be a sophomore, and he's going to be the guy with the ball in his hands. Then they also added Jaden Bradley, a former McDonald's All-American who played this last year at Alabama. And so when I look at the two guys they have, a couple things stand out. One, Kylan Boswell is a very good three-point shooter for a guy that was a true freshman and should have still been in high school last year. Yes, Arizona fans, he was only 17 years old. I know you already know that. But Jaden Bradley is kind of a different deal. Jaden Bradley is kind of a catch and attack guy. He's kind of an open court guy. He kind of finishes best at the rim, a little bit undersized at 6'3", not a great three-point shooter at 31% this year for Alabama. Well, who does that sound like when I talk it out? Kind of sounds like Caleb Love, right? Caleb Love, best in the open court, best attacking, best finishing at the rim, 30% three-point shooter for Caleb Love at North Carolina this year. And so you look at Arizona, they kind of already have the guard that can attack and finish at the rim and get to the foul line. But do you want to bring in Caleb Love? And I would assume it'd be in a starting position alongside Jaden Bradley. One, I don't think Caleb Love is coming if he's coming off the bench. And I don't think Jaden Bradley's very happy if Caleb Love would potentially push him to the bench. I saw Jason Shear, great reporter who covers Arizona, even say as much, that they would probably run it by Jaden Bradley before making any decision. But even if they did somehow clear it on both sides, they're kind of the same player. Not great shooters, attackers, all that stuff. And you worry about them offensively. But then I'll take it a step further. I'd worry about it defensively too, because you have Kylan Boswell about 6'2". You have Jaden Bradley about 6'3", and Caleb Love 6'3", 6'4". That's not a small starting backcourt, but there would be some size issues going forward. Like it wouldn't be a great backcourt defensively from a size perspective. Ideally, in a perfect world, you want bigger size in your backcourt. Think about UConn this year, the national champion. Tristan Newton 6'5", Jordan Hawkins 6'4", Andre Jackson 6'8", 6'7", whatever it was. So that would concern me, not only the offensive fit, but the defensive fit. We'll see if this gets anywhere with Arizona, but I don't love it. Let's keep it going, because I'll be blunt. As much as I dislike the fit at Arizona, I think I dislike the fit at Texas even more. Now, I know it's been an interesting offseason at Texas. You lose a pair of 5-star recruits, A.J. Johnson and Ron Holland. You also have now added a couple of impact transfers, Max Abmas and Caden Shedrick. Caden Shedrick, a forward from Virginia. Max Abmas, obviously a 21-point-per-game scorer from Oral Roberts. Why do I bring it up? Let's just go through that Texas depth chart. You have Max Abmas, 21 points per game, about 15 shots per game. Now, I think he was relatively efficient, all things considered, at Oral Roberts. But this was a guy that was used to having the ball in his hands, used to making plays for himself, used to making plays for others, but mostly the offense running through him. Not sure that that's a great fit with Caleb Love. And then on top of that, I'm definitely not sure it's a great fit with Caleb Love when you add Tyrese Hunter, the returnee from last year as well. Tyrese Hunter, 6-foot guard, not a great three-point shooter. What does that sound like? Exactly what we just talked about at Arizona. Another guard who needs the ball in his hands, who's a great playmaker, but not a great shooter. And again, it gets redundant really quick. And as much as size is an issue for Arizona's backcourt, in terms of guys that, in terms of defensively and matching up with other teams, it's even more of an issue for Texas. Max Abmas, 6 feet. Tyrese Hunter, 6 feet. So I get that they're going to be very fun to watch offensively, but I worry about them defensively. I don't think Caleb Love really changes anything. Don't like the fit at Arizona. Don't like the fit at Texas. I will say I do kind of sort of like the fit at Gonzaga, though. And Gonzaga is a school that when Caleb Love first entered the portal many moons ago, I said, I think they make a ton of sense for him. Big brand, big place, big marquee games, a program that will elevate your stature as much as North Carolina. I'm not saying it's a bigger brand than Carolina, but the same kind of program. And when I look at Caleb Love and I look at Gonzaga, the fit doesn't make as much sense now, but I still think it's a better fit for a few reasons. One, I know that Gonzaga brought in Ryan Nembhard, okay? Ryan Nembhard, 6-foot guard from Creighton. But Ryan Nembhard, to me, is much more of a true point guard. Can score, but also can get others involved. Five assists per game in the Big East last year. That's better than anything Arizona has right now. And I'm not saying Arizona guys can't get there. I'm just saying right now. Better than anything that anybody from Texas has. So he's a true point guard. And they have very good shooting in a kid named Steele Venters, who's a transfer from Eastern Washington, the Big Sky Player of the Year. So they the one thing they don't have is that attacking guard. Caleb Love seems to make a lot of sense there. The other reason that I like Gonzaga, I'll just say it, is the defensive issues aren't as big of a concern, but also Mark Few does strike me as the kind of guy that, even though Mark Few's not like a dictator, like tough guy head coach, I do think he's kind of got the gravitas to keep Caleb Love in line. I'm not saying that Rodney Terry couldn't. I'm not saying that Tommy Lloyd couldn't. But Mark Few's kind of been there, done it, coach pros, head coach, whatever. And that's the thing with Caleb Love, right? That's the thing with Caleb Love that we have talked about from the beginning with this guy. We have talked about the fact that he kind of needs a coach that's going to, that it's not going to be only about him. And a coach that can look him in the eye, and when he does something silly, and when he has a bad turnover or he takes a bad shot that's not within the offense, you can pull Caleb Love aside and say, come sit by me for a few minutes. And it's not to say the other two guys can't, but I do think there's something about Mark Few and the experience that he has, the experience that he has is probably the best word. Coach Jalen Suggs, Coach Corey Kispert, Coach Andrew Nembhard, Ryan's older brother. So to me, Gonzaga makes the most sense of those three, and I still think it's a good fit. And I think there's other good fits. I still think Missouri makes a ton of sense. Memphis would not shock me to get involved. Indiana fans seem to be still fascinated with Caleb Love. Indiana really needs about one more shooter more than they do a scorer. I don't know that I love Caleb Love with Mackenzie and Baco and all the guys that they've brought in, but it seems as though Indiana fans are still intrigued by the possibility. But I guess what I would say is, of those three, I do like Gonzaga the most, although I'll be blunt. Like I said to start, with portal recruiting, you never know. And I would expect more schools to get involved, because as critical as we can be of Caleb Love, let's also not forget, this is a guy that has, when he's at his best, has proven an ability to step up, make plays, and be great in big games against big competition. And at this point in the summer, there just aren't that many of those guys left. So it'll be fascinating to see what happens next.